All right, so the term bird nest and backlash are used interchangeably because they are, but for the sake of this video, we're gonna call it a backlash because that's technically, what it really is. Backlashes affect anglers of all skill levels. A guy that tells you he never gets a backlash is a guy that probably also tells you he caught 45 fish the day he caught 10. It all happens to the best of us. So here's the thing. Understanding how you get a backlash and how to avoid them is way better than knowing how to get them out. But if you're really good at getting them out, you'll get better at getting them out, so therefore you don't have to work as hard to get them out. And so they're both important skill sets to becoming a bass angler, because at some point you're always going to take an experienced angler out, and it's good to know how to help them get their backlashes out. So let's talk about what happens when you get a backlash. When you get a backlash, really what happens is you have an overspeed of the spool, meaning the spool is spinning faster than the line is going out. One quick way to avoid that is to set your reel up correctly. What I like to do is press the button that disengages the spool and let the lure fall. If it falls so fast that when you let it hit, it continues to spin, you're setting yourself up for a backlash, okay? Anglers with a lot of skill will get to the point where they fish their reels hot, meaning they like to let it run, but then you have to skim the spool with your finger. You have to be really careful or you're gonna get backlashes. So the way to avoid that is early on when you first start learning to cast is to crank down your side, your spool friction, not your centrifugal, but your spool friction, to where when you first press the button, the lure doesn't move. Simply back it off a little bit at a time, and on my Lew's reel, it has these little incremental clicks, and I back it off till just when it starts to run. Okay, so as you see that with the weight of the lure there, it's still not running. So maybe I need to back it off a little bit more, get it down to the point where, oh, you have to disengage the spool first. See what I did there? You have to know your gear. So get to know your gear by getting out there and playing with it. All right, so back to how to do this with the actual thing done correctly. So crank down your spool friction, press the button, crank it down a little bit more, and you need to get it into where your lure pretty much doesn't run. And then you need to back it off one click at a time until the spool just starts to run. Then what I like to do is do it a couple times and loosen it up to the point where I can let that lure fall and the spool spins fast, but it doesn't overspool. Once that happens, then I make a couple of casts. When I make those casts, I want to see if I can get the casting distance that I need. If I can get the casting distance that I need, I don't really need to let off on more spool friction. If I need more casting distance because it's a lighter lure or the rod doesn't load well, then I'll back off a little bit on the spool friction knob. But next what I do is I make a cast and I follow the lure to the water. When it hits, if it continues to spin, then I'll add more centrifugal. If it doesn't, you're good. So basically add more centrifugal to keep it from overspinning, take off to let it spin a little freer if you need more casting distance. So basically what you're looking for on premium fishing reels is you're looking for a balance. You're looking for a balance between your spool friction, which is this knob on the right side of a left-handed reel or right-handed reel on the left side of a right-handed reel, and the centrifugal. Some of these are magnetic, some of them are incremental, and some of them are a combination. This one happens to be a combination. And so basically I set it up to where I get the casting distance that I want without an overrun at the end of the spool. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna cast this lure, and when it hits the ground, if you'll notice, my spool doesn't overspeed. So in that scenario, no matter what I do, I really can't get a backlash. So that's the #1 way to avoid backlashes. Now, as you get a little bit more experienced and you want to cast further or more effortlessly or more accurately, you want to back off your centrifugal and you want to back off your friction of your spool till you get a little bit more free-flying lure. Here's how to avoid a backlash when you do that. I like to make sure that I got my trigger in the right place. I grip the spool, and I want the spool to skim along my thumb. So as I throw it, it's skimming along my thumb. Then I can add pressure and taper the lure off as it hits the water, and I never get a backlash because I'm controlling the speed of the spool with my thumb. In addition to that, another thing that you want to do, and this is probably the biggest mistake that anglers make that cause backlashes. You go to cast, about halfway there you raise your rod tip. And when you raise your rod tip, what happens is now the friction across the guides has decreased how fast the lure is going, The spool is still going the same speed, and therefore it overspeeds. As you could see in that video, it actually did overspool. And then now I'm gonna grab that line. Here's another critical component to not getting backlashes. Once you get an overspool and you get a bunch of slack in your line, put some friction on your line as you reel that slack back in. Does that make sense? And then that way you don't have a lot of slack stacking up on your spool. That's another great way to get a backlash. Now, as you notice right there, when I raise my rod tip, I'm gonna do it again for demonstration purposes, but I'm actually gonna back off a little bit on each one so that we can really demonstrate this backlash. As I cast, if I raise my rod up, did you see that kick out? What that did is that caused an overspeed, and this is a mini backlash. As I pull that out, you see the spool going the wrong way, and then boom, there came the backlash, the mini backlash. Now, the problem is if you make too much of a rapid adjustment, or if you cast and you let go too late and your lure hits the water and your spool's going really fast, which happens more often than not, or if you catch something on your back cast, you get a really crazy backlash. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna force myself to get a backlash. So again, before we go that far, the keys are set your reel up properly. Second, proper casting technique. Make a cast by loading the rod, and again, throwing that donut off your thumb, but you wanna follow the lure to the water. It'll make you more accurate. It'll keep the guide friction of your line to a minimum, and you'll avoid backlashes by following that lure to the water. But also, an added bonus is when that happens, you're immediately ready if a fish hits it as soon as the lure hits the water, which happens more often than you know, and you're already in position. If you cast and you have your rod tip up here, you engage the spool and you're reeling down, in a lot of cases, the lure's already hung up, the fish has already hit it and spit it, and you're just out of position. So that's another added benefit and reason you should cast that way. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna fake a backlash, or we're gonna make one happen. I'm gonna back off this spool friction. I'm gonna back off my centrifugal. I'm gonna cast it out there. I'm gonna kick my spool up, and boom, I got a backlash, okay? That is the bane of existence of most kayak anglers. So what I'm gonna have to do is bring you in here really close. I'm gonna show you how to get out a backlash. The first mistake most people make is to grab their running line and start to pull the line out, okay? What you wanna do is avoid that, and you wanna put your finger on your spool and take out the first little bit of friction, okay? Once you do that and you feel any friction, you wanna stop. Then you wanna grab the line and see if you can pull out any knot. See how there's two knots there? What you then wanna do is separate them. Once you can separate those into two knots, you then wanna stop and lay that to the side. You then wanna grab this next loop right here and pull it out as far as it'll go. Once you pull that out, you see how it made a nice little V right there? You wanna take that, and notice what I just did here. That is your backlash. This is the anatomy of your backlash. But if I had start pulling on my main line, I'm going to create a knot. But what I did is I simply pulled the little bit of slack out by holding my finger on the spool. And then I pulled that first loop out until it stopped. Then I pulled the second loop out until it stopped, and I found that V. You wanna find that V. This is what it'll look like. You'll pull it down to your spool and it'll look just like that. It'll be a V. Once you do that, you wanna grab that V, and once you pull that V, you wanna pull that V out completely backwards until it stops. Again, you wanna keep pulling this V out until it stops. And so what I'm doing right here is I'm backing this V completely out. Now, once I do this, notice I've got a lot of line out here. This was what was causing my backlash. So let's cut to that angle right there. See that line? That's what's causing the backlash. Now what I'll do is lay that over to the side, but I'll finger it with my hands, and then I'll start to pull the running line. This is the first time I'm pulling the running line. And if you notice right there, now I've got an overspool. It's coming off of there backwards, coming off there nice and clean, and now my line's running in the right direction. I grab that line, I put a little friction on it, I reel it back on, and even with taking the time to show you guys how to do it, it took less than a minute, minute and a half to take that backlash out. There's times it can take me 10, 15 seconds, and there's times it can take 15, 20 minutes. The anatomy and the concept is the same, so let's do it real time. You cast out there, you get a backlash, okay? First thing you don't want to do is engage your spool and spin it, but I did that to show you worst case scenario. You see all that right there? What you want to do is grab your line and just pull it until you barely get any friction. Open your bail back up, take your first loop, pull it completely out, and you notice that little bubble it made? You then want to just stop until you get a V. See that V? When you get the V, you want to grab the V, okay? You want to pull that V completely out. Now you see that spool spinning in both directions? This is the long pull that I was talking about. And really, any backlash is simply a series of making that same move till you find a V, pull the V out, and then that spool is spinning the wrong direction. Did you notice that? Now, for the first time, I'm gonna grab my running line and I'm gonna start to pull it out. Once I start to pull that running line out, you'll notice what happens here. I'll let go of that running line once it goes through my gear. I put my finger on the spool, it's running in the correct direction. It doesn't matter if it's the most tangled up that you've ever gotten a backlash or if it's a simple overrun. Once you do that, you will always be able to get out of backlash. Guys, that's as simple as it gets when it comes to how to avoid a backlash. Prevention is worth a pound of cure, but that's how you prevent one, and that's how you get one out when you get it. I'm Chad Hoover with Kayak Bass Fishing, guys. I hope these videos help. Do me a favor and share this video with friends who's ever had a problem getting out of backlash, and maybe you're not the guy that has to help them pick it out or the gal that has to pick them out. If you have kids that go out and fish on their own and they get frustrated, or every time you go find your fishing gear, it's got 15 backlashes in it, share this video with them. And again, do me a favor, if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel, turn on that notifications button so you'll know each time I release a new video where I'll teach you how to be in the know on how to avoid backlashes or prevent backlashes or any of the other thousands of topics that we plan on covering here on this channel. So thanks for y'all support. I love you guys like family because we are family. I'll see you in the next video.